Hello, everybody. This is an impromptu interview with Aleem Walji.
Yes.
Do I pronounce that right? We were supposed to do this interview tomorrow or Thursday, actually, at the Interaction Forum. But Aleem preferred to do it today, so I am also improvising. Thank you, first of all, Aleem, for allowing me to interview you for this series on leadership with meaning that I like to host from time to time when I meet interesting NGO leaders who have something to say to the sector that I think the sector needs to hear. So Aleem is the CEO of Aga Khan Foundation US. Am I saying that
That's right?
That's right. And Aga Khan, for those of you who don't know it, is committed to breaking the cycle of poverty and advancing positive change that lasts for generations to come, which I think is an interesting mission formulation, that last bit. And why I wanted to interview Aleem is because besides NGO leadership experience, he has also worked on innovation at the World Bank and worked with Google, amongst others. And when I was introduced to you, and I still distinctly remember when that was, and when I later saw you talk in Interaction board meetings, which we just finished one, I noticed how you ask questions to your peer CEOs that press them to think more innovatively and more self-critically. And even though I did not know much about your background at the time, I thought, okay, I need to try to capture that outside, what I call outside in perspective, because sometimes I think you're saying things that speak to the mindset of the NGO sector and mental models that we have that I think are not always that helpful. And I think your role is very useful to spur innovation. So that's what I want to focus on organizational innovation strategies in the short time that we have. So Aleem, for people who do not know the Aga Khan Foundation at all, please tell us briefly what makes it distinct as an NGO.
So I would say that we are a global development organization that strives to improve the quality of life of people all over the world. We now reach more than 30 million people as a network, and mostly in Africa and in Asia. But I think what makes us distinct is that we make big bets. So we invest over very, very long periods of time. Like we build universities, for example, that we don't think are going to have immediate impact, sort of as we would expect, until maybe 100 years. So we think generationally, we build permanent institutions, and we're willing to take risks in a way that very few institutions are. So we built the first nursing school in Pakistan, for example, in the early 80s. We invested in the first telecom in Afghanistan right after the fall of the Taliban. We invested in the first private media company in East Africa after independence. Many of these are now investments that are very successful, but they took decades, and nobody necessarily expected them to succeed at the time.
And that is one of the reasons why your mission statement emphasizes that lasts for a generation to come, right? Which struck me again.
I mean, we are led by a Muslim leader who's been doing this for 1,400 years through his family. So when we decide to do something, he asks us, what is this going to look like in 200 years?
Wow.
There are very few leaders who look at the world that way.
That was a killer sentence, like a Muslim leader who is through his family over a multi-generation has done this for 1,400 years.
Yeah.
That's amazing. But today I want to talk to you about your work experience before you became the head of Aga Khan Foundation US, because you crossed over from the private sector as well as from an intergovernmental organization like the World Bank into the NGO sector, right? And I immediately thought that is interesting. So given your background at the World Bank, where you worked on spurring innovation, right? And at one point, a long time ago, I worked there as well in a very different and I think probably much less interesting role, if you will. But tell us about some organizational level innovation strategies, right, which in your experience work well within the NGO sector since you joined that. So organizational level innovation strategies that also work well in the private sector in the World Bank, but also work well in the NGO sector, or something that's distinct about the NGO sector where you've had to adapt to such strategies.
Well, I would say that what I learned about innovation accidentally is just the range of experiences that I've had in my life. So having worked in the private sector, having worked in government, having worked in the multilateral world, having worked in the NGO sector, you learn very different things and you're exposed to very different things that in one context would be described as innovative, in the other context maybe not. And so the ability to connect dots in ways that are both unapologetic and unafraid, because you say, oh, but this worked here. Why would you say that it would never work here? So I've been able to connect dots in ways that have allowed me to see things through in a way that maybe others have not because of any genius on my part, but because of exposure.
So I want to ask you more about that term connecting dots.
Yes.
Because I am not as deeply steeped as you are in innovation strategies, but I have read up a little bit and used it in some of my senior leadership teaching that and training that I've done with other colleagues at the Maxwell School. I think I have a sense of what you mean by that, but tell us for this broader audience that we have here, connecting why does that spur innovation?
So one of the first things that I did at the World Bank when I joined was recognized that we were spending $60 million a year on data collection. And most of that data, once used once, went into some shelf or hard drive.
Yeah.
And I had a hunch that data, if it was made open to the world to use, people would mash it up and use it in all kinds of ways to make maps and apps and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
And what we realized as an example is that when we made some of our data available from the World Bank on cropping patterns and productivity in agriculture, people took that data and weather data in Africa and they figured out what to grow when to reduce agricultural risk. The World Bank would have never done that.
Right.
All we had to do was release the data. Other people found other data sets, connected it, and made really wonderful things happen. Now, my point is, why did I have that idea?
Yeah.
Because I had worked at Google on things that had nothing to do with agriculture or weather.
Right.
But I realized that what Google does really well is it aggregates data, makes it easy to search, and throws it back at people.
Right.
And what Android did at the time when it was competing with iOS, with Apple, is it allowed folks a platform with data upon which they could build all kinds of applications. So I had this understanding that if you could create a platform or use an existing platform, give it sort of inject data, let a bunch of people know about it, you could connect developers, i.e. software developers, with development practitioners and watch magic happen.
And it's that, to follow that case, it's that connection between software developers and development practitioners who never before
talked to each other. They didn't talk to each other. They didn't know how to talk to each other.
So it's about, if I'm maybe too simple about it, it's about connecting very unlike-minded characters who together find out that they can innovate and produce something,
that's never been done before. But what it requires is bridging leaders and translators.
Okay,
and in a sense, that was the role that I played at the World Bank, is that I was by no means a software developer. I was by no means an expert. But I had lived and worked in the world of the Silicon Valley in ways that I had understood a few of the paradigms, the ideas, the platforms, the possibility, and then went to the World Bank and spoke to folks that really understood development well and data well and research well, but didn't speak the language of the Silicon Valley. And we created these like boot camps and created these kind of, convenings whereby these two folks would be able to talk to each other and create things together.
So bridging and translating, you said, correct?
Yes.
So does it then logically follow that to spur innovation within organizations such as NGOs, it is useful to have people in that NGO who come from these
different backgrounds.
Diverse
so that's
backgrounds.
The magic of innovation, is it's putting people together that come from different backgrounds, but who respect and value different skill sets. and recognize that one may not always necessarily understand what the other is talking about, but over time they will develop a shared vocabulary, but appreciate the respective strengths that each other have in ways that they can create new things altogether.
You mean including respecting the other's skill sets, etc.
Yes.
Right.
So it's about a software developer respecting an economist.
Yes.
It's about an anthropologist respecting a computer scientist.
Yes.
Vice versa.
Yes.
And that's what I did in graduate school. So it's interesting. I just, now that I'm talking to you, I'm realizing this, is that I decided to go into urban planning.
Yeah.
Why did I decide to go into urban? I was actually really interested in architecture and in anthropology, but I realized that there was a field that brought together designers, anthropologists, economists, and sociologists and engineers to build a city.
Yes.
And I thought, my goodness, what an incredibly intersectional way of looking at the world. If you can learn to work in a team like that, it's not just urban planning you can do. There's lots of things you can do.
Yes. Makes good sense.
And that was my first exposure to the world of technology as an anthropologist.
So interesting. I'm already regretting the fact that we have so little time for this interview. So let me, though, with that in mind, jump to a different question, but still related. Given your background across sectors, and we just said how important that is, right, to spur innovation, to have people like you, to what extent do you think leaders in the public, government, and nonprofit sectors, you worked in all, need to think and behave differently, and I'm emphasizing also behavior, in order to be effective in spurring innovation within their organization?
Well, I think we made the comment just a moment ago that you have to be willing to listen and learn from those that are nothing like yourself.
Yeah, you
right?
did. Mm.
And so, when I've worked in the public sector, I've actually worked for a consulting firm, a private sector consulting firm that served the public sector. So I haven't actually worked for government. I've worked as an urban planning consultant. I've worked as an international development consultant, but not in the public sector. So I have to I have to temper my comments as such. But what I would say is that in the experience I've had both in the multilateral world as well, which is international development institutions, as well in the private sector, as well now in the kind of international development sector, is that what I think holds people back is not fully paying attention to what's going on around them. You get very caught in your, not only in your silo, but in your job. So I experience this all the time, is you get so caught up in your 100 emails a day and in your management, tasks and in your board meetings, etc., that you fail to notice that AI is changing the world. You fail to notice that 5G is going to have a tremendous impact on what's going on around you. What is going to be the impact of machine learning, right? Now, this may just sound like blockchain, whatever, right? But unless you realize, and I just think 10 years ago, everybody talks about the internet and, and mobile, fine, do we all appreciate that? But if you take the example, which is less talked about, of GPS and geo on our world, you could have said, those are maps. Maybe I'll use them in my car or not. But if you think of how embedded GPS and geo is in almost everything we do today, from like where to shop to where to eat, the walking down the street and tell you might enjoy going to X, there's a coupon for you for Y. That's in the private sector. You might say, well, that's normal, things happen in the private sector. How you deliver humanitarian assistance, how you think about market pricing around agricultural crops in Kenya. Geo has had a huge impact on that.
Yeah.
So, even in the sector that we live in, unless we're paying attention to blockchain and what impact that might have on being able to trace crops of a farmer go back to Kenya, from Kenya to France, and how organic goods will benefit from better supply chains, which are rooted in understanding how blockchain works, I'm not doing a good job as a development practitioner. So I think that when it comes to innovation, a part of it is looking to see what's going on around you, making sure you're surrounding yourself with people who have very different skill sets at you, and being able to design small-scale prototypes, not pilots. I say pilots are for airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
Prototypes are about having a hypothesis about something that you want to try, having a very clear method to test small, think big, fail fast, and fail forward. Data collection, discipline, and iteration. That's what I've learned in my life.
Yeah. Oh, that would be so much. I'll say something at the end about another idea for another separate interview I might have for you. So let me move on. Let me see how much time we have. Oops, very little. I have to move to my last question.
Okay.
And that is the one, completely jump here, everybody follow me. And it's just because of lack of time. What does leading with meaning mean for you? What does it imply for you in your daily behaviors and actions? Not just kind of high top values, but what does it mean on a daily basis for you?
Well, a lot of people ask me why I do what I do right now and why I have chosen to spend my life mostly doing the work that I have. I could work in the private sector, or I could be a consultant doing all sorts of things, and maybe I will one day. But to me, it's about asking yourself, what is success? Success in life, success in spirit, success in how you think about the world, how you want to model for your children. And in 1996, my dad gave me a card the day I graduated from MIT, and it was a poem. And it was a poem by Ralph Waldo Emerson that I had read in high school and hadn't read since, but loved at the time. And as it turns out, it's become my motto for life, and I carry it with me every day.
I know, I noticed that.
And, it's about what I would call service above self, which is a motto of the Rotary Club, where my dad was also a member. And I'm just going to read to you one line from the poem.
Okay.
It says, "What is success? To leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child or a redeemed social condition or a garden patch. To know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded." So that inspires me. Every day I think to myself, what have I done so that one life has lived better? And if you do that for enough days, maybe a lot of lives live better.
So now I do have to, can I ask you one more follow-up question? Because this is hugely, what you just read and how you talked about is hugely motivating. And at the same time, we need to keep things grounded here, right? So let me ask you, squeeze in one more question. Can you share something about what you've learned from past leadership failures?
So I would say that this idea of leading better is something I aspire towards, as I'm sure many CEOs and others do. And the first thing that I've learned without hesitation that I would say, there was a book I read in graduate school called The Reflective Practitioner, Don Schoen. And the notion is you cannot just do without taking a step back and thinking, what have I learned?
Right.
How do I assimilate all these experiences to be better at what I do, to be better at what I practice? And so I think the first thing is to take time to reflect. I think the other thing is to build teams that are both diverse and that are in many ways smarter than you are. I remember somebody once saying, who's the smartest guy in the room? And the answer was the room, right? And so how do you surround yourself by different backgrounds, whether it's gender or training or socioeconomic backgrounds that you just couldn't make up in your own head.
And not feel threatened.
Exactly. And I think I've learned that for them to perform their best, you have to have a personal relationship that goes beyond a professional technical management relationship. And so getting to know your staff better and well, I think makes the best out of the team. And I think in many of these 3 instances, I've not gotten it right over the course of my life. And so there have been times that I've managed less well. And I don't know whether I would call it a failure, even though I think it's important to use the term failure sometimes, because that's the only way to sort of ground yourself and be honest. And I would say when I was at the World Bank, one of the things I just got wrong is I wanted to create something called an innovation lab.
Yeah.
And what I realized is, though, while we got to do very fun and exciting things in the bank, in the lab, we became an island, not a peninsula. And so I said, be Florida, not Hawaii, right? And it's not unless your innovation and your work is connected to something greater than yourself, that you could really have long-lasting impact.
And
that's
that
what I like.
actually makes us circle back to the beginning when we talked about organizational innovation strategies, because you would also say you've learned that the innovation work has to be, if it is going to be concentrated instead of spread around initially, it has to at least be a peninsula and not be an island. There's so much more that we could talk about, but I have to let you get to your call. So I want to thank you so much for this brief interview.
It was a fun conversation.
It was fun, wasn't it? And I know that our audience will find it to be of value. Thank you.
Thank you, Tosca.